Everybody vibes with the all-new Camry, a standard 225-horsepower engine and an available sport-tuned suspension provide the power and agility to take you anywhere, and to do it in style. With available features like the two-tone midnight black metallic roof, color-matched sport grille, panoramic glass roof, and cockpit red leather trimmed interior, the Camry has never looked better. And because every all-new Camry is a hybrid, it delivers up to an EPA-estimated 51 miles per gallon combined. Whatever your vibe, it's a Camry vibe. Learn more at toyota.com/Camry. Before we get started, a quick warning that today's episode contains mentions of violence and miscarriage. This month, we're talking about adversaries, women who fought for their place in history, whether they fought to get to the top of their sport, against how society perceived them, or fought with each other to be champions. We're talking about women who broke barriers and sometimes did seemingly impossible or unspeakable things to carve out their place in history. This episode of Womanica is brought to you by the all-new Toyota Camry. Today we're talking about a woman who risked her life and family to fight for Palestinian and women's rights. She led a historic group of women in protest and boldly stood up against the government she resisted. Please meet Naila Ayesh. Naila was born in Jerusalem in 1960. She grew up on the outskirts of the city in the Palestinian village of Lifta. In 1969, Israeli military forces destroyed her family's home during fighting over control of the West Bank in Gaza. Naila was 8 years old. She grew up during a time of violent conflict between Israel and neighboring Arab nations. Military searches and patrols were part of the fabric of daily life. She later said, "This is normal for children to grow up hearing bombing, tear gas, checkpoints. It is unlike any country in the world." As a young woman, Naila attended the Academy of Science in Bulgaria on scholarship. There, she met her husband, Jamal, who was also Palestinian. They moved to Gaza after finishing school and got married in 1986. During this period, Naila became increasingly politically active and joined the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. This was a risky choice. The Israeli government criminalized political organizing among Palestinians that brought into hatred or contempt or excited disaffection against Israeli authorities. The people behind that organizing, like Naila and Jamal, were closely monitored. Naila was pregnant when she was arrested for the first time in 1986. Israeli forces detained her for 45 days, and Naila suffered through interrogation and torture. During that time, her family didn't know where she was being held. When Naila began to bleed heavily, she repeatedly asked for medical treatment that she did not receive. After she was released, without being charged with a crime, Naila learned she'd had a miscarriage. In 1987, the First Intifada began, a Palestinian protest movement against Israeli occupation in Gaza and the West Bank. The First Intifada began as a largely nonviolent movement. Jamal was deported from Gaza for his political activities. Naila was pregnant again, days away from giving birth to their son. Her husband lived in exile in Cairo. In his absence, Naila began working with other Palestinian women to build a network of protests. They protested out in the open and consistently, demonstrating resistance through everyday tasks. They organized boycotts against Israeli goods and learned to grow their own produce. When the government shut down schools, Palestinian women established their own. They created health clinics and organized strikes and marches. Naila and her fellow organizers traveled through villages across the region to garner support for both the Palestinian cause and women's rights. They hid leaflets and loaves of bread they distributed to families. When Palestinian men were involved in violent conflict or deported, women like Naila kept the movement alive. Naila was arrested again for her involvement in the First Intifada. Because her son was still a baby, he was permitted to live in prison with Naila. For 6 months, they were behind bars. She later recalled, "The first tooth was in the prison. The first step was in prison." In 1991, Naila was also exiled to Egypt, where she and her son were reunited with Jamal. That same year, Israelis and Palestinians began peace talks in Madrid on the international stage. These efforts did not result in a treaty. A separate peace convention was held in Oslo, which excluded the Palestinian women who'd been instrumental to the grassroots organizing that had forced negotiations in the first place. At the Oslo Accords of 1993, Israel recognized the Palestinian Liberation Organization as representative of the Palestinian people, and the PLO renounced terrorism and acknowledged Israel's right to exist. The parties agreed on the creation of a Palestinian Authority that would take over governing the West Bank and Gaza over 5 years. Additional talks would then take place to address the future of borders, refugees, and Jerusalem. Sadly, the Oslo Accords were, by no means, the end of violent conflict in the region. Naila and her family returned to the Palestinian territories, and she became director of the Women's Affairs Center, a nonprofit advocating for gender equality. She continued to raise awareness about how women's daily lives were burdened by a lack of peace and stability in Palestine, resulting in things like electricity outages and water shortages. As Naila said, "It is women who wake up in the middle of the night to wash things when the electricity comes back." In 2017, Naila was featured in the documentary Naila and the Uprising that chronicled her involvement in the First Intifada. Today, she remains politically active. As she said, "We can't be free as women unless we're in a free country. And even if we're free of the occupation, we can't know freedom as long as we're subjugated in our own society." All month, we're talking about Adversaries. For more information, find us on Facebook and Instagram at Womanica Podcast. Special thanks to Liz Kaplan, my favorite sister and co-creator. Talk to you tomorrow. Everybody vibes with the all-new Camry. A standard 225 horsepower engine and an available sport-tuned suspension provide the power and agility to take you anywhere, and to do it in style. With available features like the two-tone midnight black metallic roof, color-matched sport grille, panoramic glass roof, and cockpit red leather-trimmed interior, the Camry has never looked better. And because every all-new Camry is a hybrid, it delivers up to an EPA estimated 51 miles per gallon combined. Whatever your vibe, it's a Camry vibe. Learn more at toyota.com/Camry.